Yes, thank you all for being here in our fourth speaker in this speaker series. This is supported by the Sesquicentennial Fund. We want to thank UNG and the committee for their support. I'm excited to introduce Dr. Mize, who is a UNG graduate. So really excited to have an alum from UNG here back with us today. So I'll read from her bio. Jamie Myers Mize is a historian of American Indians of the Southeastern United States. She received her BA in history from Truett McConnell University, her MA from UNG, and her PhD from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. Her research focuses on Cherokee masculinity and how gender expectations informed men's political decisions in response to the pressures of colonialism. She teaches courses on American Indian history, the history of global indigenous peoples, and colonial and early American history. Her talk today is titled Native Identities in 19th Century North Georgia. Please join me in welcoming her.
I'm going to try to play peekaboo with everybody in the room around this column. Thank you so much for coming to listen to my talk today, particularly during the lunch hour. I do appreciate it very much. So I'm not going to waste any time saying anything else about myself. I've been finally introduced, so I'm just going to move on. So I know the title says Native Identities, but I'm going to be talking specifically today about the Cherokee, and I cannot get my slides to
There we go. All right, now it's working.
all right, so I'm showing you a map. Can y'all over there? Can y'all see this map?
Yeah,
There's one over there. So this gives you an outline of kind of Cherokee territorial claims at the close of the 18th century. So you can see that their territorial claims were pretty vast. This would have been claims right around the time of 1775. But one of the things that I want to highlight for you is that even though there's this really big outline, you'll notice that towns are kind of located in one central area. So something important to think about is the fact that this larger area then would have been utilized for hunting and other economic endeavors, not so much just village sites themselves. So as was mentioned in the introduction, I'm supposed to stay on this side or I'm sorry. I focus a lot on gender in the research that I do, and really thinking about how various different gendered identities impact the way that people live their lives. So one of the foundational basis for everything that I look at are the cosmologies. So in Cherokee culture in particular, there is the cosmology or creation story about Shelu and Kanadi. And that creation story, like most creation stories, has a lot of different details to it. But one of the really important things in terms of kind of understanding gender and how gender worked in historic Cherokee society is the way that the cosmology established a division of labor. So in the story, Shelu, the mother, so Shelu and Kanadi are the first couple in Cherokee cosmology, and they have 2 sons. And as the story goes, the mother produces corn and beans by scratching different parts of her body. She scratches underneath her arms, and beans fall in a basket. She scratches her belly, kind of the area of her womb, and corn is produced in a basket. So the boys witness this as part of the story. In contrast, Kanadi was known as a great hunter, and the boys they're very mischievous. They follow him into the woods and notice that he rolls a stone away from a big cave and lets out one deer, kills it, takes it home, they eat it for supper. And so it's through this story that it's established for us that women have a role and responsibility as cultivators and that men have a role and responsibility to provide protein and things like that for the diet. And so the way that this kind of translates into how the society itself was structured is there was a segregation of labor. Women were expected to do certain and specific tasks, and men were expected to do certain and specific tasks. Sometimes when I talk to students about this, they get kind of excited because this is not at all kind of like a patriarchal sort of system that maybe we're used to hearing about in history. But also at the same time, we don't need to get carried away and call it a matriarchy either. The idea here is that these are non-hierarchical gender roles. They complement each other. One's not more important than the other. It takes both to work together for the society to continue to be. The other thing that is established in the cosmology through the story of Shelu is matrilineal inheritance. Does anybody know what that means? It means your family is who you're related to through your mother. So everybody raise your hand if you have a mother. All right, very good. Do you have any brothers, sisters? Does your mother have any brothers or sisters? Does your mother have a mother? Okay, all of those people, right, are your family. And so they reckon their idea of family around their mother and who their mother's siblings were and their mother's mother, so forth and so on. It's not that being a father didn't matter, but does everybody remember that like term or question from the 90s, like who's your daddy? That is not a question that they asked themselves. It wasn't important. It's more about who's your mama. So everything was organized based on matrilineal inheritance. The other thing that's very important is the fact that they practice matrilocal living arrangements. Now that we all know kind of what the matra root means, does anybody want to, sorry, right here. I apologize. Does anybody want to venture to guess what matrilocal means? Sir.
Did it have to do with like, as opposed to like when the wife marries a husband in our society, she goes to the and the husband goes to the mom?
Very good. Well done, sir. Gold star. What is your name?
Seth.
Very good, Seth. Seth's right. Yeah. Once a coupled, right? Because they didn't have marriage the way that we would think of it. It wasn't a legal, contractual, binding arrangement. But once two people coupled, the husband would leave the home of his mother or his oldest sister, depending on how old he was, and he would go to his wife's household. And typically what would happen is you would have a bunch of sisters living together in the same house. And if you think about it, this makes a lot of sense in terms of how people engaged in their labor. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about that. According to the cosmology, what did Shelu create? Corn, did I say squash? I don't like to say squash. Corn, beans, squash, that's fine, we can go squash. And I said that established the fact that Shelu was a cultivator of crops, right? And so by extension, women were expected to grow the food. And the really neat thing for Cherokee society is the fact that women and the households themselves actually control their cornfields. And so if you think about how big cornfields can be today. I live in southeastern North Carolina. There are a lot of cornfields there. I forget there's not really that many around here, but corn can go on for a long, long way. And so it's a very labor intensive kind of work too. And so oftentimes, women worked together. And if the household itself is what's kind of controlling the inventory, the cultivation, and then what to do with it once it's harvested, it makes sense then that your labor force is concentrated and living together because it just makes the work that much easier. But these were incredibly feminine spaces, right? We have traders, other European observers that joke around in their observations about how oftentimes young, newly married men, imagine like they're at the very bottom of the power hierarchy of the household. And so oftentimes they would just sleep in the council house just to kind of get away from all of the pressures of the household. But so that's how the cosmology informs some of the basic social organization. And I have this map here for you so that you can, those little pink highlighted areas that I showed you on the previous map, this is a more up close version. And so these are an agrarian people, right? They're cultivating corn. Men supplement the diet by hunting and providing various forms of protein. But one of the things that kind of growing and cultivating corn allows you to do is it allows you to kind of stay put. So I don't know how many of you are confused the way that some students tend to be confused, and not just students, but just Americans in general. They have this idea that all Native people are, wore feathers in their hair and tracked buffalo and lived in teepees. And that's not true at all. Particularly when we're talking about the Southeast, you don't just like range miles and miles away from your very important, valuable foodstuffs of corn. Additionally, people were able to kind of stay in set village sites because once corn is harvested, it can be kept for periods of time, right? So you can see that most towns are situated along waterways, and of course that makes sense. These are going to be, in terms of soil cultivation, more fertile areas, right? And then, we all need water. All right, so I'm going to say a little bit more about what women did and what men did. All right. So, as I mentioned before, again, the cosmology is setting this structure for us. Basically, women had power through their ability to create life. And that meant plant life, right? They were responsible for growing the main foodstuffs that everybody ate, as I've already gone over in some detail. I won't continue to beat that horse. But also they created human life, right? They were the main source of the continuance of the people. And so that meant that their societies had a tremendous amount of respect for them because of this power that they had. This is one of the reasons why, in addition to kind of living together in these matrilocal spaces, they're also the heads of these households. So what that meant then is that women were responsible for making decisions that impacted the household itself. And typically that had to center around cultivation, but it could also center around, decisions about reproduction and things like that. They were clan matrons. So in addition to being the head of household, they were also the oldest woman would have been the senior most figure in her clan. Does anybody know what a clan is? Seth, where you at? I'm kidding, you don't have to. So clans are just another way for society to organize itself. So they are a group of, basically the way to think about it is extended kin. So at the time period that I'm talking about in Cherokee society, there were 7. And so everybody that was Cherokee, could claim to be Cherokee, could identify as Cherokee, had to have one of those 7 clan affiliations, right? And again, because they practice matrilineal inheritance, how do you get your clan identity? Through your mother, okay? And so what that meant then is, of course, right, as children are born, as women give birth and new Cherokees are born, they have that identity. But that also extended to adoption as well. So Cherokee women were the gatekeepers of their society. They could take outsiders, people that were not Cherokee at all, did not have one of those clan identities, and through the process of adoption, both real and fictive, they could make them community members. So I'll talk a little bit more about real adoption in just a moment, but I do want to say real quickly about fictive adoption. So when these historic Native groups engaged in diplomacy, either kind of with other Native groups or with Europeans, these diplomatic relationships were solemnized through ritual and ceremony. And one aspect of that was through a kind of ceremonial adoption ceremony, where not so much where these people become like real adopted members of the community, but they don't necessarily have outsider status anymore either. They're brought in just enough in order for some sort of trade relationship to be established or some sort of alliance. And I just wanted to highlight that because it establishes the way that women were also engaged in politics that involved aspects outside of the home. So even if they weren't there speaking, they were often there in that symbolic role to transform these people that are outsiders into people that are known so that relationships could be established. All right, so apart from kind of creating fictive kin, most women's political authority emanated from the household, okay? So I don't know how many of you have taken kind of like gender classes and things like that, but there's a really outdated kind of concept of public versus private spheres. So if you're familiar with that, that's not what I'm talking about. If you're not familiar with that, pretend like I never brought that up. But what it means is, again, that women had this tremendous responsibility and authority through their ability to create life. I mean, they had direct control over who was and who was not a member of their society. And again, they relied so heavily on corn. And because women controlled what they cultivated, they made decisions about how it would be distributed, who would get some, who wouldn't get some. That gave them a tremendous amount of influence. And so if you think about, again, these households and how they're structured, men would have been putting themselves in a very precarious and uncomfortable situation had they acted against the will of the women of their household. So even though we don't have, women aren't really speaking in council and things like that, they have a tremendous amount of influence. It's not so much like stay in the house and just, keep your mouth shut and don't be seen or heard, but it's more about, because they were the creators of all of this life and because that work on both levels was happening within the house, that's where they received their authority. And economic autonomy, what I mean by that is what I said about the foodstuffs. They control all of that, and so that gives them tremendous amount of economic autonomy. They're not having to rely on men the way that some of the other community like different cultures, the women in those cultures have to. All right, so what about men? What do men do?
They hunt.
Yeah, they kill things, right? They kill animals and they kill people. And that's how they have powers, through the taking of life. And again, the focus here is on complementing roles. And so they had a responsibility to respond to calls of their clan women. So there weren't, at the time that we're initially talking about, there weren't courts of law and things like that that existed. And instead, if, what is your name?
Libby.
Libby?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, Seth. I'm going to continue to pick on you because I know your name. Is that all right?
For fun.
Okay. So, what's your name?
True.
True?
True.
Drew. Seth kills Drew. I don't know why you did it, but you did it. All right. And so Drew is Libby's kin. All right. And let's just imagine that Libby is a clan matron. You just got promoted. Yes. All right. So Libby is a clan matron. And then we're going to pretend like y'all are younger married warriors. So warrior 1, warrior 2, is that fine? Okay. So warrior 1, warrior 2 are married to Libby's daughters, right? So Libby and her 2 daughters are living in this house together. Her son has been killed by Seth. Bad. And so it's Libby's responsibility then to request that her kin avenge that death. Go kill Seth. And so oftentimes, like obviously it doesn't work like great, good job if you can actually get Seth and everybody knows it was specifically Seth. But most of the time it would suffice if you could just get somebody from Seth's people, like any of y'all over there at that table are now brought into this. And that's how injustices were dealt with. So anytime that there was a loss of life that happened outside of natural causes, there was this expectation that women, through their grieving, their outward displays of grief and crying and wailing, would encourage. She doesn't want to send another clan member, right? Because that would just create more imbalance if they were to lose their lives. But since these 2 warriors are not married, if they die, it does create imbalance, but not more imbalance for Libby. If that makes sense. Sorry. It would be your mother's or sister's responsibility to do something about you. Anyway, the point here is that everything is very interconnected. So even though people have these kind of sexually segregated specific tasks, they do complement each other and they're kind of bouncing off each other frequently. So men are political representatives. They speak. That's what their responsibility is. They deal with outsiders, whether that be village to village, region to region, or international, with other Native groups or with Europeans. And oftentimes they will because they have the responsibility to deal with outsiders, they'll represent women in economic exchange. So if a household of women decide that they have this surplus corn, just for example, that they want to sell to passers-by or people that recently moved into the neighborhood, men would have the responsibility to kind of go market that for them. All right. So things really begin to change at the end of the American Revolution. So that big red outline I told you, that kind of goes away beginning in 1775. And by the time we get to the end of America's War for Independence, we're down to this kind of black outline that encompasses Alabama, Georgia, a tinge of South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee. And the government at this time, the United States federal government introduces a civilization program. And basically the civilization program, the federal government said, we're going to help you become more like settler colonial society. So the federal government promised funds to help men become farmers. right? Because Cherokee people were already farming, yes. It was just the women were doing it. And so this meant buying plows, things like that. Also, the federal government promised to provide herds of livestock. So they wanted men to begin practicing animal husbandry. Don't hunt anymore, right? Instead, get you some herds of cattle, pigs, and things such as that. They, at the same time, de-incentivized hunting. So a lot of they were called trade factories, but basically these kind of trading outposts in which Native people would bring goods and the federal government and its representatives would offer them various different things for typically deer pelts at this time. The federal government decides we're going to start closing those down. We don't want to encourage y'all to hunt deer anymore. Men pick up the plow, and then women, we need you to go further into the household, right? And so I have we can't see it because the Zoom thing's covering it up, but this is a portrait of what civilization was kind of supposed to look like. So the very pale white guy is Benjamin Hawkins, who was actually agent to the Creek people. And you can kind of see a few things. You can see he's like pointing to this plow and instructing the men about how to use the plow. You can see there's kind of a change happening in the background with the different structures. There's some horses back there, some cattle. And then the other thing that I think is instructive is there's one woman, and then what is she doing? Can anybody tell? Nursing. So again, putting this emphasis on really kind of constraining women's roles. Yes, women will still have babies and we still want them to be good mothers, but all of the other things that they were doing, those sorts of practices need to end. So a lot of Cherokee people embrace the civilization program for the same reason why a lot of people at this time, like the turn of the 18th and 19th century, get swept up in something called the market revolution, which is a massive economic change that is happening all across America. Cherokee people and other native Southerners are experiencing these economic changes just like other settler colonists and various other sorts of people were. So real quickly, the federal government devised the civilization program because wars with Native people were really expensive. And at the end of the American Revolution, the federal government had no money. And so Washington, who was the first president of the United States, you knew that, right? You did know that. You knew that. Good. He kind of became a spokesperson for this plan. Again, trying to avoid costly Native or wars with Native groups. But one of the like handy dandy consequences of it was the idea that if Native people stopped hunting, right? You already didn't need all of this, all of the red, what was the red outline? You don't need that anymore, right? Those village sites were just right along rivers. And then you're not going to hunt at all anymore, Drew. Do you need so much land? That's right, you don't. You don't need so much land. What?
He said he's already dead.
You're welcome. You don't need so much land. And so the federal government thinks, isn't this neat, right? We're going to civilize the Native people so we don't have to worry so much about war. And then, lucky us, we've opened up all of this additional land for Americans to settle on, right? And so We move into the 19th century, and Native people, historic Native people, were not stupid. Okay, they understood what was going on. They didn't just come out of the rain. Some of them may have been born at night, but not last night, you know, all of those things, right? And so we begin to see that they transform their social structures, they transform their political structures, and these are done to kind of meet these issues that are coming up within this context of colonialism. So again, because people are embracing, like, I'm gonna own some cattle now, I'm gonna own some horses now, I'm gonna own some, I don't know, other pretty things, right? In 1808, the Cherokee government creates a law that says that children can inherit private property from their fathers, okay? Again, how did people frame their thought processes about who their family were? Mother, right? So you can see this is a big shift. Before, right, again, I told y'all it didn't really matter who your dad was, but now you can inherit some of your dad's stuff. As a small, actually it's not a small aside, but as an aside, one thing that did remain consistent, that never changed, it's important to keep in mind, is they retained communal land ownership. So people could amass like movable things, like the table and the chair. Like I could say, these are my tables and chairs, and I'm going to give these tables and chairs to my kids. Mm-hmm. But the whole land in which my tables and chairs are sitting on, that was still everybody's. That makes sense. 1810, outlaw clan revenge. Livy is not supposed to call to have Seth killed anymore. Sorry, Drew. Instead, courts are created, a light horse, police force is created. But I will say that creating a law is not the same as enforcing the law. And we get like 10 years down the road from this, and the agent is still saying that the practice continues. Do not obey the law, Libby. 1817, electoral districts are created. I'll show you that in a second. 1821, syllabaries finished. 1825, big year, because again, matrilineal inheritance meant what? Not a rhetorical question. Matrilineal inheritance meant what? Right. Everything went through the mother. But now, 1825, it doesn't matter. You could have a white woman be your mother. And if your father was Cherokee, now you can identify as a Cherokee as well. Big change. And then 1827 is when they establish their constitution and limit suffrage to men. All right. Can anybody move this going?
I can make it go.
Thank you. All right. So thank you, Doctor.
You're welcome.
So on the wrong side of the room. These are the districts that are created. And in 1824, so the districts are created in 1817. In 1824, the Cherokees conduct a census. So this is something that they're doing themselves. This is not anything that the federal government has asked them to do. And Hickory Log is the district where we are right now. Okay, so I don't have. If we look at the census information, Hickory Log, in terms of kind of tangible evidence of quote unquote civilization, Hickory Log lagged behind everyone. They had no slaves. They had very small herds. They had farming implements that were so few that they just wrote farming utensils in proportion to the population. They couldn't even count them. There were so few of them. But at the same time, Hickory Log is notable for the number of white spouses, specifically white wives that live in the district. So on one hand, Hickory Log seems to demonstrate a lot of some of those social changes that we saw highlighted in the law, but at the same time, they don't seem to really be embracing the economic side of it that we said kind of kicked everything off. But, okay, so this is census information from 1824. By the time we get into the 1830s, Hickory Log is arguably one of the more wealthy districts. And I think a lot of that, as well as the intermarriage, has to do with the geography. So you can see that Hickory Log is located as a border district, and it's not so mountainous as Toccoa and Ocoee, those that are well established in the mountains. And so the people that are living in Hickory Log are coming into contact with various different sorts of people all the time. Oh no, can't advance. There we go. All right, so this red line kind of shows you the trajectory of the federal road. And so you can see that the federal road went straight through the Hickory Log district. That brought so many outsiders through this particular portion of the Cherokee Nation that different people are kind of bumping up against each other all of the time. We see that perhaps these individuals are not amassing huge herds of livestock, but at the time of forced removal in 1835, when federal agents are coming through and kind of trying to compensate people for the improvements that they're going to be leaving behind, they have tons of private property. And it would seem that what they've done is, rather than kind of engaging in a large enslaved workforce, rather than engaging in plantation forms of agriculture, which was ways that other people were gaining wealth in other regions, they're focused very much on trying to capture the economic opportunity afforded to them by travelers. So Lake Lanier didn't exist, right? But the rivers did. So this area here that is all Lake Lanier wasn't there, but the Hickory Log, this outer boundary was established by rivers. And so countless numbers of Native people owned and operated ferries that ported people across the river. You couldn't travel on into the nation and get where you're going without crossing a body of water. In 1817, the Cherokees petitioned the federal government to give them control over maintaining the federal road itself. And they set up tons of like stores, taverns, entertainment houses, inns, all of that along this section of highway. And it allows them to gain riches just by capitalizing on their geographic location. So there's a tremendous amount of economic change that happens from 24 till 34, basically. And I wanted to kind of highlight for you, I'm going to wrap up here just a second. I wanted to highlight for you kind of the complexities of all of this by looking at a couple of individuals. So James Daniel was a prominent politician from Hickory Log District. He served as the circuit judge for a long time, but also as an elected representative on the council as well. And so at the time of his evaluations that were made, there were 12 Cherokees living in his household, 6 readers of English, no readers of Cherokee. He had 37 slaves. So all of that suggests a lot of cultural change, right? But he had married 2 Cherokee women, which was a historic practice and something that we would like consider much more quote unquote traditional. In addition, all of his siblings lived in the same neighborhood. So they're not all living in the same houses, like a matro-local sort of arrangement, like what we talked about at the very beginning. But we can see that all of the Daniel siblings are neighbors. They've like created a little Daniel community among themselves. And you can see that one of the brothers, John, reported one reader of Cherokee in the household. All of the sisters are located as neighbors as well. And Nancy had a pretty large household and 4 readers of Cherokee. So there's a lot of kind of conflicting things going on, even just within this one family. And I would, so much of the way that things are recorded in the 19th century designated people by blood. Full blood, half blood, mixed blood, quarter blood, quadroon, various things like that. I think a lot of that language is kind of distracting, so I haven't included it here, but to say that there are no full bloods listed on any of their household census information. So instead, I'm kind of trying to rely on the readers of Cherokee to kind of ascertain maybe how people are identifying. And James lived in a fancy house, super fancy house. I have the details of it here up front. I'll be happy to share those with you later, but I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna keep moving. And then the last person that I wanted to show you, we'll talk about, was Moses Paris, who had property everywhere. So rather than having like a big plantation spread like James Daniel, he had taken advantage of merchant activity and bought up little farms in a bunch of different places. He actually decides, with all of the other Parises that I can find, to leave in 1832. They complain about just like settler encroachment, and they decide to go ahead and relocate. There's a whole group of Cherokee people that had already relocated to Arkansas, and so they go out there. He is an elder, or like the main Native person in charge at the Tensawati Church, and apparently convinces the entire church congregation to move as well. So it's this interesting kind of extended kinship network happening there. And they also talked their missionary, Duncan O'Brien, into moving with them as well. So before forced removal, these people willingly decide. Oh, and he's married to a white woman. All right, so these are my groundbreaking conclusions about all of this. I'm still kind of working through a lot of this genealogy, but the shocking conclusion that I've come to is that identity was much more than we've given credit for in the past. Because I kept asking myself this question: why would these men marry these white women and risk the identity of their children? Because all of these individuals, there's so many of these men that are making these marriages before the law in 25. But then I'm like, dummy, like, how does the law work now? It's so reactive, isn't it? And so this was obviously something that was happening already, and then the politicians were like, we should probably make a law to like say that this is okay. Intermarriage had been happening for generations, typically Cherokee women marrying white men, because again, inheritance through the mother. This, coupled with that continued exchange, created identities. I just don't think that they were sitting around pondering their identities the way that we are placing upon them, which, I mean, that makes sense. Most of us don't sit around and go, am I, what am I, I don't know. But I do think it's a question of yes and rather than either or. So not like native or settler or white or whatever, but like yes, and that, and that, and that thing. Theoretical identity labels don't capture the nuance, blah, 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 blah. Blood is too rigid an identity, and there's nothing that I can find in any of this information about any of these men that give any indication whatsoever that they were considering themselves as fully or partially or whatever of anything. Questions?
So
Yes, sir.
is it possible then that we see an increase in Cherokee men marrying white women to help advance the civilizing ideas that white women would be more adept or more willing to accept those new social structures?
There's no evidence that they are doing that.
Okay.
That's the hilarious thing about it. Like a lot of times agents are complaining about white women that have come into the nation and the fact that all of these Cherokee women are much more industrious than them. Like Silas Dinsmore goes off on a whole rant about these Adams girls and about how they're worthless and lazy and like he wanted to see them burned at the stake. I mean, it was intense. Because they weren't being the examples that they were meant to be. But I do think that more numbers, right? Like the more people that can claim a Cherokee identity, the more will be strengthened if our population continues to grow. So I think that was probably a consideration. And then the thing that I struggle with the most is the thing I haven't accounted for, which is, romantic love. Other questions?
Yes, I was curious about the adoption. So was it really common when it was like matriarch decided?
Oh, I never got to that, did I?
And then
We didn't talk about that.
and then once it got later and you started being able to inherit through your father, were adoptions still matriarch decided?
So as we move into the 19th century, there are stories about how men began adopting other younger men. I want to explore that a little bit more fully because I don't know if that makes sense to me. But thank you for reminding me. So you died, right?
Yeah, then you brought it back.
Drew died. So Libby, when she asked her sons-in-law, to go avenge Drew's death, they didn't necessarily need to kill anybody. They could have brought back a captive. And then Libby and the other women in her house could decide, do we want to ritually torture and kill this person? Or do we maybe want to adopt them? And so that's how real adoption happened, was through making decisions about what to do with captives. And once whoever, I don't know which one you think looks more adoptable than another. That's fine, you don't have to pick. Once that decision was made, that person would have been considered a full and complete member of your family. There never would have been like any conversation of like, oh yeah, that's right. Or not exactly like us. That wouldn't be the case at all. Thank you for your question. Did I answer it?
Yeah, well, also towards like the later 1830s, and it was like these men, what was his name? Daniel and Moses. Would they have been doing any adoption practices? Because now it's not so major.
Probably not. I haven't found anything in the record that suggests that these men adopted anybody. And given the fact that James Daniel married two women that were sisters, it seems like he's thinking about things much more matrilineally than his economic life suggests. That makes sense. Yes.
All right, talk about your sources too. Are there Cherokee sources? I think in the census, US census data.
So some of it is US Census data. So the stuff from the 30s comes from those evaluations, and that we have to rely on the federal government and their census takers to do that. The really neat thing about that census in 24 is that the Cherokees do it themselves. And that's why I'm so fascinated with it, because they've decided which categories they want. The really annoying about it, though, is they just did numbers. I have no idea who. They didn't go house to house and give me any sense of like how people were settled, who they talked to. They just did numbers. But this 1824 census is published in their newspaper in 1828. So the Cherokee Phoenix is a good source of information. That's how I get a sense of a lot of the political debate, who the political representatives are. The missionaries themselves are a great record source. They're kind of imperfect ethnographers, but because they're so interested in conversion and things like that, they do take pretty good detailed notes about and cultural norms and stuff like that. Kind of thing. If there's any other major source. There's really been a lot of genealogical stuff to try to figure out who these people are, how they're related, and kind of pick apart and why they're decisions. And the fascinating thing too is we tend to get very fixated on people being in a specific place. And I know I said that there are very people, so they're not moving around a lot. But even in this like short span of time, people are moving around within the nation itself. So like some people would be in Hickory Log, and the next time the census comes around, they've moved to Swati or somewhere else. Yes.
So this population data is both male and female, or does it also include children in the total population?
That's a good question. I don't know if it includes children. It definitely includes males and females. I'll have to double check the newspaper. It probably gives an age cutoff, but I don't think it includes children. And they use the British spelling of plows. Yes.
So I'm just looking out here, the white spouses and wives, are they included in the total population?
Mhm.
Okay. I just listed them extra.
Again, this is the category that they created that they wanted to count.
Did Cherokee Phoenix tell you why they took the census?
There's this great quote by Boudinot that where he says that the purpose of conducting the census was to show everyone how advanced they were in civilization and to demonstrate that some districts were more advanced than others.
Question about you showed that map of road, federal road, and talked about the wealth, or not like the work, like construction, that road of entertainment and stores and fairs and stuff. So is that kind of taken in was that all disappeared in that wealth, or does that?
They are compensated for their houses and entertainment, anything that they constructed along the road. They are compensated for the structures themselves.
But they're gone after that, essentially. It's all gone.
No, not necessarily. White settlers, can just move into those spaces. Like, again, James Daniel's house is so nice. There's no way anybody just tore it. It had Venetian blinds. I mean, somebody else just showed up and I was like, this is nice. Great. Look at my marble portico.
But not owned by Cherokee. It's nothing stays in Cherokee.
No, now some Cherokee people will buy their stuff back. And individuals, the state of Georgia passed a law in 1839, I believe, or whatever dates, that granted Georgia citizenship to some individuals that had intermarried or that had white spouses. So some men that were Cherokee but married white women were able to kind of buy their stuff back and keep their. But a lot of people.
We have time for one more question, and we have someone in the chat who wanted to ask something. So I think they can speak on the microphone. You want to go ahead? Maybe they couldn't hear me. Jerry, if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, thank you very much. In some former colonies, it's usually suggested that Men and women at some point are complementing each other's labor during traditional society because they're working around the farm and the home. But then that women's labor gets devalued through colonialism once men's labor starts to be paid, so that labor that is compensated in monetary terms is valued over women's labor, which is mainly around the home. Now, among the Cherokee, does the intermingling with outsiders, with white people, and opportunities for paid employment outside of the home, which men are more likely to take, end up devaluing women's labor, which is not paid?
It's an interesting question. So there's not a tremendous amount of evidence that men were being employed outside the household. You had to have, in order for people to come into the nation, they had to have passports. And so that really did kind of limit who could come in the nation and who could come out. And honestly, men put themselves at a lot of risk leaving the safety of the nation, because particularly as we move closer to this moment of forced removal, I mean, torturing's become really nasty for Cherokee people, and the courts are set up in such a way that Cherokee people have no redress if they're assaulted or even killed. And so it's not so much a situation, it's not really safe for men to leave and be employed outside the home.
I think we've, with that, thank you so much.